Hey everyone, hoping everyone is good, hoping everyone is well. We are into a new season and I'm excited about it. This is a more open dialogue with me sharing some things. And I did so because I wanted to open up my heart. And I also wanted, people to understand what the healing process entails by just being honest and truthful about my own individual journey. And by the title, oops, I forgot to tell you you're adopted. I want to take you down this whole story and I want to give you some takeaways as well. And I know that there are some people who are adopted or may have adopted children. And I just want to give you a perspective that maybe you haven't thought about because this may not be your experience. And if you are a person who has been adopted, I'm sure that some things will resonate. And I don't know. I just want you to take a listen and just be open and receptive to what I'm about to say. I was about 7 or 8 and I was at school. It was the end of the day. And so we were waiting to get picked up, from our parents. And I had a cousin that ran up to me and he said, "My grandma told me that you're adopted." And I was standing next to one of my friends. And when he said that, I just remember my heart dropping and I remember like getting cold and warm at the same time. And I was really holding back tears because number one, it scared me. And number two, I didn't expect it. And so I remember my friend looked at me and she said, "Are you okay?" And I knew that she saw that I was holding back tears and I was like, yeah, I'm okay. And the whole day, that is all that I thought about because there was a fear that if I would have told my parents that I knew that I was adopted or even asked the question, that they would send me back somewhere that I didn't want to go to. I think in my mind as a 7 or 8 year old child, I thought that me acknowledging and asking, my parents would lead me to being put somewhere else because the secret was found out. It became more evident once my brother was born. This was my adopted parents' only child. My mother had tried for years to have children, and so adoption was one of the things that they felt was suitable, for their family dynamic, and my brother was the miracle child. When he was born, I immediately knew. But the thing about it is, years ago, even before this was told to me, I always felt misplaced. And I always felt different because I did not look like my parents and I didn't look like other family members. And there was just this keen and distinctive, these attributes that my mother's side of the family had and my father's side of the family had that just ran deep. And I didn't have these features. So anyway, years went by, and if you listen to Monday's episode, Fatherless Daughter, I was very, very, very close to my dad. And even with knowing in the back of my head that I was adopted, I didn't care because my father was everything to me. But after, again, the process of, losing my father and my mother going through what she was going through, I really began to feel some type of way because my mother was treating me like I was like a horrible child. And again, it was her deflecting on her anger and her grief in that process. When I was about 14, this is kind of when my life took a shift because a lot of things began to happen in my teenage years. And I remember my mother was she was just on me, it's like nothing that I could do sufficed. Nothing that I said was good enough. And I remember, I was so hurt and I just flat out asked her in a conversation, I was crying and I said, "Am I adopted?" And I'll never forget the way she looked at me. She paused and she said, "Where did you get that from?" And I said, I told her the person who said it. And I said, he told me when I was, I can't remember if I was 7 or 8. So I'm just going to say, 7 for reference. And I said, when I was 7, such and such told me. And I said, "Am I adopted?" And I was literally in tears. And my mama said, "You are." And so she kind of sat down and she was angry that I knew. but also she was I could tell, trying to get herself together to like have this conversation. I think in my mother's mind, it was too soon. And so as she began to tell me about the situation, she was not doing so in grace. And I really remember that. I remember how that unfolded. And she basically said, your mother left you at the hospital and she didn't want anything to do with you. And we went in and we wanted, a child, and we went and got you. And she went through this whole spiel. And just for preface, my mother was a RN, a nurse. And so she said, you were amongst foster kids and you were sickly. My biological mother, never got any prenatal care. And so when I was young, I had asthma. And so they wanted to put me with a family who was knowledgeable and who could take care of a child who was considered sickly. And if you know anything about the adoption process, any child who is, mentally handicapped, who are sickly, are really at the bottom of the list, and they're more likely to be in foster care. So the way in which my mother explained everything almost made it seem like she was being the hero. And I'll go back to that again later as I begin to talk. So she told me, that they really wanted to pair me with someone who was a nurse or a doctor because the illness was bad, and that I needed at that time 24-hour care because I was having, asthma attacks around the clock. So as she told me, I was crying, because again, this is a revelation that I had sat with for years, but now hearing the story really just, I don't know, it just brought so much emotion. And she did tell me that I had a brother who was 2 years older than me, and that the situation was not one where my biological mother felt like she could raise a child. I'll skip over onto going into years of aftermath of knowing, and then my teenage years. And I remember when my mother would get angry, the first thing that she would say is, basically, I took you in. And listening to this over and over in a disagreement, or whenever she got mad, really made me feel small, because I felt like I was always indebted to my mother, and that she could, for whatever reason, decide that she didn't want me anymore. Legally, I was her child, and honestly, I didn't see my mother as anything else but my mother, because you have to understand, the story in which my mother told me was that my biological mother, gave me up and wanted nothing to do with me. And I don't know if you could just picture this, but being told that you are not wanted, but wanting to be wanted by just a person, wanting to be loved, and just wanting to be accepted. And I really think deep down in my heart that my mother and I were so different that we just could not mesh. And also outside of that, I understood the love and attachment that she had to my brother. And honestly, I didn't feel jealous of my brother at all. I understood it for what it was. And I love my brother. And it just was, I don't know if it was more so like just the caring nature in me, but I love my brother, and I didn't see him as any different based on the fact that biologically he wasn't my brother, because he was. But there was a difference in the way in which my mother treated me and my brother. It was apparent. And so anyway, going through life and just going through that situation really just made me not trust people. And I always felt that I, wasn't good enough. I continued to feel that I was like a person to be thrown away, because again, this space that I shared with someone who, I looked at as my mother, many times acted as if she didn't even want me to be around. So later, when I got pregnant with my son, this was the first time that I really had a pull to know who my family was. I remember being asked about medical history, and I knew none. I only knew of my adoptive parents' history. And so I remember calling my mom and I said, Mama, do you have any history on my biological mother? I kind of need to know this stuff because, they're asking for this stuff. And she got snappy with me. And she said, put whatever. Most Black people have hypertension. And again, this was the dynamic. Like I could not have conversations with my mother. And so it was very much debilitating because now I'm grown and I feel like I should be given insight on things that, would be great for me. So after I had my first son, a few years after that, I went into the Georgia Registry of Adoption and I saw where you could apply for non-identifying information. And this would, again, not identify who your parents are, but give you like a description and maybe give you some history of them. And they'll also give you some medical history as well, limited. And so I applied for getting the information. It took about a month and I got everything back. And so I got a description of my mother. I received hospital records from the hospital in which I was born. They crossed out the name of the hospital, but I was able to see how much I weighed. And they also gave me a copy of my mother's statement, and it was totally opposite of what my adoptive mother said, but here's the kicker, and we're going to get to that in a minute. So my biological mother's statement and reason for putting me up for adoption is that she was going to be joining the Army and that she already had a child and it just wasn't going to work. And so she decided to put me up for adoption. And so that was what it was, because this is information that I had, and she had descriptions of what my father looked like. And again, at that time, it verified that I did have a brother who was 2 years older than me. So I sat with that information because I could have proceeded to reach out and find my biological mother. But everything in me told me to wait because this wasn't the time. Again, I was emotional about reading what it was that I was, looking at. And secondly, I didn't know if I really wanted to proceed with it because I wasn't sure how my mother, my adopted mother, would feel based on how she felt before. Years later, I kept getting these signs about reaching out to my family. And I have 3 boys. So again, every time I was going to the doctor and they needed medical history, I had no idea what it was that I needed to give. And it made me feel like I just wasn't in the know about who I was, where I came from, and who my people were, for real. Medical history is so important. And so after I had my last son, I really began to pray on it, and I asked God to just lead me in the right direction. And here's where everything unfolds. So in 2016, for whatever reason, it was laid on my heart, and I mean a pounding, demanding act now, to fill out those papers, pay the money. I think it was $350 to open up my case so that I could find out who my biological parents were. So I filled out the information. I put in the $350. I did a money order and I sent it off. Well, before I sent it off, I called just to make sure that everything that was said on the website I had, just to verify. And the lady on the phone said, definitely, you have everything. Go ahead and send it over. It usually takes a month for the search, and we'll keep you abreast to the process and everything. This was a Monday, y'all. On a Friday, I got a call. And I had saved the number from the Georgia Adoption Registry. and I got a call. It was around 11 o'clock that morning, and a lady said, hey, she said her name, and she said, I'm with the Georgia Adoption Registry, and I want to just let you know I got some information. So I'm all jittery, I'm nervous, I'm shaking. And she said, but I unfortunately have bad news, and now my shoulders are sinking, and I'm like, just give it to me. And she said, unfortunately, your mother passed away in 1995. And I just remember, trying to hold it in, but I eventually cried on the phone, and she said, I'm so sorry. And she said, but I want to give you this information. So she gave me my mother's maiden last name and her married last name. And she said, though I can't do any extensive research on my end based on the fact that your mother is deceased, you can take all of this information, and sometimes you can go into Google and an obituary pop up and you can find family members. So she said, be smart about your research. And she was like, I feel good about this. And so I got off the phone and I got, myself together, and immediately I began to Google. Well, I didn't find my mother's obituary on Google. So I sat with it all day. I was very emotionally distraught, and I was angry because I felt like, there was this rush to do this, and now I'm like at this, standstill. Like, what do I do now? So this aha idea came, and it said, everybody is on Facebook. Go and look up your mother's maiden last name and see if you can find anything. So y'all, I went on Facebook and I'm putting in my mother's last name, which was Stubbs, her maiden last name. And I'm searching and I'm finding people in the area in which I was born, and I'm trying to connect the dots. And I was doing this, and y'all, I think I was going crazy because I was like inboxing people with the last name Stubbs who lived in a certain area of Georgia that just seemed like it was a connection. And then all of a sudden, something just said, take a break. I became overwhelmed and emotionally I was just tearing myself apart. So there was this last ditch effort for me to go in and search again. And I went to and put in this last name of Stubbs, and this person popped up by the name of DeAndre. And I went on his Facebook page because it was open, and he made a status saying that he missed his grandmother. And about 2 months prior to that, or a month maybe, his grandmother had passed, and he had a picture of his grandmother and also the front of her obituary. And so there was her name. So I went in and I put the name in Google, and there pops my mother's name, Cheryl Lynn Stubbs. And I cried. And I knew that this was a family member. This was my cousin. And so as luck would have it, I don't think it's luck, but as life and blessings and God revealed things to me, under that status, a lady said, DeAndre, I'm trying to get in contact with your mom. Here's my number. Please give me a call. And on the reply, he put his number and he said, I'll be calling you from this number. Look out for it. Bingo. I got a connection. So in fear, y'all, I dialed those numbers, and I dialed the number, and I didn't get a a pickup, but it was, he had a voicemail. And so I left on the voicemail, hey, my name is Lisa Marie. I need to talk to someone about Cheryl Lynn Stubbs. If you can give me a call back. And I waited up that night until about 1 o'clock that morning, because I could not sleep. I was anxious, and I also was a little nervous. So I finally went to sleep. And around 8 o'clock that morning, I got a phone call from that number. And when I answered the phone, the person on the other end was like, I got a call from, this number saying, they need to talk to me about Cheryl Lynn Stubbs. That's my auntie. And his voice was trembling on the phone. And so it immediately started to make me cry. And I said, I don't know how to tell you this, and I hope this doesn't scare you, but I'm her daughter that she put up for adoption. He dropped the phone, y'all. And he picked the phone back up and he said, what? He said, how old are you? And at the time I was, oh goodness, I can't remember how old I was. But I told him, he said, when is your birthday? And I said, September 9th, 1982. And he said, oh my God. And his mother was in the background. And so he said, Ma, come get the phone. And so she got on the phone and she said, oh my God, baby. She said, tell me when you were born again. I said, September 9th, 1982. And she began to cry. And this is why she began to cry. The cousin in which I was talking on the phone with was born September 8th, right? And this was a day before I was born. And my aunt in which I was speaking to on the phone and my biological mother were very close sisters. And so they were, she said she remembered when my mother went into labor. And they were thinking that I was going to be born on September 8th, like my cousin. And my mother went into the hospital and she told everybody that her baby was stillborn and I was the child that was supposedly stillborn. And as she was telling me this, she was crying and she said, my sister lied to everyone. And she said, we always thought it was mysterious because when she said it, my mother, which is my grandmother, wanted to see me, the baby. And she said, you know, my mother made up a story and they just chalked it up as being stillborn. But here is where it gets a little, crazy. My aunt said to me a few years ago, your sister called me and asked me, does she know that of a sister? And she said the reason why my sister asked about it was because their dad was drunk one night. And in his drunkenness, he said, y'all have a sister out there that lives in Georgia. And he began to cry. And they thought that he was just drunk out of his mind. But they began to take him seriously as he began to repeat, y'all have a sister out there. In the same breath, my aunt said, baby, you have 7 other brothers and sisters that live in Connecticut. And she began to cry. And she said, I'm going to give you their information. And matter of fact, I'm texting them right now. And she said, I did not expect this. She said, can you please send me a picture of you? And so as I'm on the phone with her, I sent her a picture and she hollered in the phone. And she said, oh my God. She said, you are the spitting image of my sister. I remember somebody said something to my dad a long time ago as it related to my brother. And he said, the person said how much my little brother looked like my dad. And for those who are absent as parents, they can't deny these kids because most times they come out looking like them. I remember that. And so my aunt, she just kept going on and on about how I looked exactly like my mother. And so while we're on the phone, I get a beep in and there's a call coming in and I see that it's from Connecticut. And I said, somebody's calling me from Connecticut. And she said, that's probably your sister Shantae. Hang up the phone and answer it. So as I got on the phone, my sister was screaming in the phone and she said, I knew it. She said, I asked Aunt Kathy years ago, and she said we didn't have a sister, that our mother had a baby that was stillborn. And she began to cry and she said, are you on Facebook? And I said, yeah. So we are frantically trying to find each other on Facebook. And so I found her first and I said, oh my God. I was like, we have the same eyes. And I'm just like in tears. And she said, I can't find you. Send me a friend request. And so I sent her a friend request and she did the same thing that my aunt did. She began to scream on the phone and she said, oh my God, you look just like our mama. And we were crying together on the phone, and she said, "This is just unbelievable." And then I began to get more calls and more calls from my brothers and my other sister. And it was the most overwhelming feeling ever. It was like the prayers that I had prayed throughout the years and this sitting in my soul of wanting to just identify with someone was coming to fruition. And then I got a call and I answered the phone, and this guy with this deep voice, he said, "Throughout the years, I thought I was going crazy." He said, "I'm Ken. I'm your older brother." And when he said that, I just began to cry because I couldn't hold it in anymore, because he was the brother in which I knew about. And I always said if I could get to my brother, I was okay. And he said, "I remember when Mama was pregnant." And he said, "I remember it because years later, I asked my stepdaddy what happened to the baby in Mama's stomach, and I got beat for it because they were trying to hide and conceal this pregnancy, and I didn't understand why." And he said, "My stepdaddy told me, don't you ever speak on it again." And my brother said, "I remember." He said, "I remember my mama being pregnant, and I remember rubbing her stomach. And I remember her telling me while we were in the room that I had a baby sister, and I got excited." And something about that really penetrated me, because I felt that in my spirit, my mother really wanted to keep me. After talking to my brother for long lengths on the phone, he finally told me, he said, "Our stepdad was abusive in ways, and I believe he was the reason why you were put up for adoption." And he said, based on his experience, his stepfather was really mean to him. And he said, "I think, our mom was in between my father, which would be my older brother, father, and the current guy, which is the stepfather, which is the father of all of my other brothers and sisters." And he said, "I believe he was the reason why you was put up for adoption, because he was not going to raise another man's child, or he was unsure if he was the father of you." And so I sat with it for a minute, and I listened to everything that he said, because this was his experience and he knew more than everybody else. And from that moment on, we just connected and bonded, and we would talk every single day. And I remember reaching out to my mother's husband at the time, my other sibling's my other sibling's dad, and we had a conversation. And he said, I would have kept you. And there was some sincerity in his voice, but again, I wasn't there and I didn't know, so therefore I wasn't going to judge. And having these conversations with my aunt, she said, "You are so forgiving." And I said, "I can't forgive what didn't affect me. I truly understand that things happen for reasons that are beyond me, and maybe they were young and made a decision based on, what they were going through at the time, and I just didn't have the mindset to be angry." In this process, I felt very guilty. And everyone was on Facebook, all of my siblings, and there was a fear that this would be posted on Facebook and they would tag me and that my mother would see it. And so I called her and I said, "Mama, I really need to talk to you whenever you get home." And she said, "No, talk to me now." And I said, "I really don't want to talk to you right now. I'd rather you be home and have this conversation." And she got angry with me. And she said, "I'm about to stop on the side of the road and I need you to tell me what's going on now." And I said, "Ma, I found my biological siblings." And she got quiet on the phone. And she said, "Well, how did that happen?" And I said, "Well, I went to get information, and I said, my mom, my biological mother is no longer living." And I remember saying that, hoping that me saying it would allow her to be more at ease because there was no competition, because I knew how my mother worked and her mind was wired. And so I said, Mama, she died. And matter of fact, just to preface as well, my mother died at 33, 34. She died having my youngest brother, Richie. And she's, ultimately sacrificed her life to have my little brother. And again, in that conversation, I wanted her to know, like, my mother's no longer here, her brothers and sisters. And my mother got angry with me, y'all. And she berated me with, I guess I'm nobody to you. Why would you do that? And, in that moment, I felt like I just wanted to be honest. And she made me feel so stupid. And that was where the argument ensued, where she cut me off. And then we had this argument, but this was the basis of the argument. The fact that my mother didn't want me to seek my biological family. And she began to treat me like a stranger. She would make comments like, I guess I'm nothing to you. I took care of you all of this time, and this is how you do me. And I guess you don't love your brother. And it was horrible. It was really horrible. So 2020, 2019, 2020, all the years after that, 17, 18, 19, I kept in contact with my brother Ken. Like, we had deep conversations. We talked every day. He would text me and tell me how much he loved me. And oh my gosh, it was like meeting the male version of myself. It was so deep. And so when my mother passed in 2020, he texted me this long message and was telling me how sorry he was that I lost my mom. And of course, I previewed him into what I was going through, but not a lot, because I didn't want to go into all of the factors that, were a part of my life. But I was lonely, and he was the person that I could talk to, and he was so non-judgmental. And so he knew, that there was a space there, and he sent me this long message and just wanted to let me know that he loved me. And that was July 17, 2020. In September, I got a call from my brother, and I heard some beeping in the background. And I said, Ken, where are you? And he said, I'm at the hospital. He said they found a spot on my lung. And I said, what does that mean? Like, I knew what it meant, but y'all, I needed him to explain. And I said, Ken, what does that mean? He said, I don't know. They're going to try to see if, they're thinking it's cancer. And so I just remember it being quiet. And I said, well, they caught it early, so I know everything's going to be okay. This is me being positive, not understanding and knowing my brother was sick the whole time. So, I said, Ken, call me later. We talked, and I had to meet a client. And then I said, Ken, call me later, because he was getting some tests done. And Ken didn't call me that day. And so I called that morning, which was that Saturday, to check up on him, and his wife answered the phone, and I talked with him briefly. And then the next time I called, and he was going to the hospital. He was a little out of it. They had given him some medicine, and I was telling him, Ken, I love you. You gonna make it through, blase, blase. And then Ken's health began to decline. I lost my brother September 30th, 2020. 1 week, a week and a half after his episode of going in the hospital. And I think the double whammy of me losing my mother in July and then losing my brother just spent me out of control. I felt I was going insane, but more so because I had someone finally in my life that was the mirror of who I was, and my brother was no longer here. What I didn't mention was I went to Connecticut 2018, 2017, I can't remember the date. And I saw my siblings. When I looked into Ken's eyes, I literally saw myself. We had the same features. We have the same eyes. And we held each other and we began to cry. And so after losing him, that is what I saw, was his eyes. And then when I went to Connecticut to go to his funeral, I remember just standing, looking at him in the casket, and feeling as if God was still taking people away from me. I loved my brother. I loved him more than I could even define, because I found in him a safe space and I understood who he was. And it's almost like we were trying to catch up for the years that we had missed. So that chapter ended with, his death, and everybody took it so hard. Here's what I learned in the aftermath of all of this. Even though things happened in my life that I really wish that didn't happen, in talking to my brother, I understood that my siblings had a very hard life where there were so many of them, so resources and, were scarce. They were being raised by their father. So he was a single parent and he was trying to do the best that he could do with all of them. Since my brother was the oldest, many times he would sit with my siblings morning through the night and trying to navigate like an adult as a young child, feeding, changing diapers, doing chores in order to take care of his siblings. It was a hard task for him, and he spoke about it very often. So in that, there is a sense of peace that I didn't get to experience some aspects of a biological family and the things that they went through. But on the flip side, I experienced so much of things on my end. I am grateful because I did get to experience in the first 10 years of my life 2 parents who poured in resources and love and wanted nothing but great things for me. And I was introduced to some things that I knew that if I had been with my biological siblings would not have the privilege to have. Secondly, it taught me outside of this that, regardless of biological, not biological, love runs deep. And I loved my mother so much that I didn't care that she wasn't my mother. I just needed her to see me as an individual. And that's where we bumped heads. That I think she was holding on to so much. And that her hurt caused her to show up in ways that looked like she hated me. I also learned that the way I looked at adoption for me was like, looking at a puzzle piece, a grand, beautiful puzzle piece, but seeing that there was a hole there in the middle. Cannot find that puzzle piece and sticking something that looks remotely like, the piece that needs to be there close up. It doesn't go, but far away, if you walk far away, it looks like it goes together. And that is literally the position in which I felt adoption was for me. That under close examination, you just realize it wasn't a cohesive puzzle. Standing back, it looked great. I'm thankful. And I'll always say that I am thankful. I am thankful to have a big family. You know, I don't look at my mother and my father's family as adoptive family because they are my family. But I'm also just gracious that God allowed me to connect with my siblings. That we share a space and that I feel I know who I am. And more importantly, one thing that I have gotten to understand and share with my sisters is medical history and understanding. I remember having a conversation and my sister was telling me about some things she was going through, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going through this as well. And then finding out my other sister was going through it, and we not knowing that our mother had a history of the thing that we had issues with. And so that for me was important. And the fact that my biological sisters and brothers make sure that they are keeping in contact, and my aunt bridging the gap and making sure that she stays in my life. Adoption is one of those things where it is a gift. It is a gift. But if a person is not ready for the responsibilities emotionally thereafter, there will be, there will be some consequences after. I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for what I experienced, and I am thankful for the fact that I am able to sit here and even tell this story, because many people don't get to find their biological family and don't get to connect and don't get to talk. I'd like to say that God united with my mother and just made it happen. My aunt, also told me this, and I'll never forget it. She said, my sister just started having babies. I think what's so interesting is that there is about 2 years between each of us. There's 2 years between my sister Shantae. Then after that, it is my brother Randy, Tarice, Tashay, Michael, and Richie. And between me and Ken, there was 2 years. And she said, my sister just kept having babies. And she said, now that I know that you're here, I understand that my sister was trying to fill a void after giving you up. And I believe that's what it was. And she said, I remember our mother telling my sister, you're having babies too quick and your body can't take it. And after, my mother had my brother Richie, her body couldn't take it and she died. Her living is not in vain. She made beautiful kids. We are all different, but the same in our own way. And I am truly thankful for what God has provided in my life. In everything, we should be thankful. Even if, some things caused issues and a little bit of trauma. But I'm thankful I can navigate through it. And I'm glad that we are sharing this space and that you listened all the way to the end. I really didn't mean for this to go as long as it did, but I guess when you're sitting in honesty and you're just, divulging your heart, this is what happens. I'm so glad that you are here. I am thankful that you are listening. I'm glad that you are present, and I truly hope that this helped someone. I don't know, I'm getting emotional right now, so I'm going to sign off, but I just want you to know that your living is not in vain. And if you were adopted, it doesn't mean that they didn't want you. It means that circumstances that arise it wasn't your fault. I'll say that. And you can't help the way in which people behaved and decided to navigate in their life. I love y'all. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.